Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment. The Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male ran from the early 30s until the early 70s in Alabama. It was conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service. They recruited 399 poor black men who were infected with syphilis. But here's the thing. These men were never told they had the disease. Researchers told them they were being treated for something called bad blood. The men didn't receive real treatment, just placebos. When penicillin became available in the late 40s as an actual cure, the researchers actively prevented the participants from getting treatment anywhere else. They lied about their real condition so they could keep observing what syphilis does to the human body until death. By the time it ended in the early 70s, only 74 of the original 399 were still alive. 28 had died directly from syphilis, 100 from related complications, 40 of their wives had been infected, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. But the study only got shut down when it leaked to the press in the early 70s. For 4 decades, with a cure available for 25 of those years, researchers deliberately let men die. The scandal sparked national outrage and led to deep ethical reforms in American medical research. Guatemala Syphilis Study. Between the mid-40s and late 40s, American researchers ran secret experiments in Guatemala. They used prostitutes to infect prisoners, asylum patients, and Guatemalan soldiers with syphilis and other sexually transmitted diseases, all to test how well penicillin worked as treatment. When that didn't move fast enough, they switched to direct inoculations. That meant pouring syphilis bacteria directly into men's penises, onto scratched forearms and faces, and in some cases through spinal punctures. Around 700 people were infected, including orphaned children. The study was backed by the U.S. Public Health Service, the National Institutes of Health, and the Guatemalan government. It was led by John Charles Cutler. Yes, the same guy who later worked on Tuskegee. But Cutler chose to do the study in Guatemala because he wouldn't have been allowed to do it in the United States. When the research finally came to light in 2010, the U.S. government officially apologized to Guatemala. Project MKUltra. In the early 50s, the CIA bundled several interrogation and mind control programs into one project with the codename MKUltra. The program got over $25 million and ran hundreds of experiments on human subjects across 80 different institutions. The goal? Develop interrogation techniques, truth serums, and methods of mental control. MKUltra researchers dosed more than 7,000 U.S. military personnel with LSD without their knowledge or consent at Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland. Years later, over 1,000 of those soldiers suffered from illnesses like depression and epilepsy. Many attempted suicide. One sub-project called Operation Midnight Climax used CIA-paid prostitutes to lure clients to safe houses in San Francisco and New York, where they were secretly drugged and watched through one-way glass. In the early 50s, Dr. Frank Olson was given a dose of LSD without knowing it. 9 days later, he fell from a hotel window under suspicious circumstances and died. In the early 70s, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MKUltra files destroyed. Some survived due to a clerical error. They'd been sent to the wrong office. Willowbrook Hepatitis Study. From the early 50s until the early 70s, mentally disabled children at Willowbrook State School on Staten Island, New York, were intentionally infected with viral hepatitis. The stated purpose was vaccine research. From the early to mid-60s, Dr. Saul Krugman from New York University promised parents of disabled children that their kids would be admitted to Willowbrook if they signed consent forms for procedures he claimed were vaccinations. In reality, the procedures involved deliberately infecting children with viral hepatitis by feeding them an extract made from the feces of patients infected with the disease. The children developed active hepatitis and were observed as the disease progressed through their bodies. Parents signed consent forms believing they were protecting their vulnerable children. They were actually authorizing them to be deliberately infected with a serious liver disease. The researchers' justification? The children would probably get infected anyway, due to the institution's unsanitary conditions. Willowbrook turned promises of care into instruments of deception. Plutonium injections. From the mid to late 40s, 18 people were injected with plutonium as part of the Manhattan Project. Albert Stevens, a man misdiagnosed with stomach cancer, received treatment for his cancer at the University of California, San Francisco Medical Center in the mid-40s. Dr. Joseph Gilbert Hamilton injected him with Pu-238 and Pu-239 without informed consent. Stevens never had cancer. Surgery successfully removed the benign tumor. He lived another 20 years with the plutonium inside him. Because Stevens received the highly radioactive Pu-238, his accumulated lifetime dose was the highest anyone has ever received, 64 sieverts. That's 6,400 rem. Neither Albert Stevens nor his family were told he never had cancer. They were led to believe the experimental treatment had worked. His cremated remains were secretly acquired by Argonne National Laboratory's Center for Human Radiobiology in the mid-70s without consent from surviving relatives. Some of the ashes were transferred to the National Human Radiobiology Tissue Repository at Washington State University. They keep the remains of people who died with radioisotopes in their bodies. Stevens was deceived in life, robbed in death, and studied forever. Holmesburg prison experiments. From the early 50s to the mid-70s, Holmesburg Prison in Pennsylvania served as the site for extensive dermatological research, using prisoners as test subjects. Led by Dr. Albert M. Kliegman from the University of Pennsylvania, the studies were conducted on behalf of Dow Chemical Company, the U.S. Army, and Johnson & Johnson. A medical journal from the mid-60s reported that 9 out of every 10 prisoners at Holmesburg were medical test subjects. Dow Chemical wanted to study the health effects of dioxin and other herbicides because workers at their chemical plants were developing chloracin. Kliegman applied about the same amount of dioxin that Dow employees were being exposed to. The Holmesburg program paid hundreds of inmates a small stipend to test a wide range of cosmetic products and chemical compounds whose health effects were unknown at the time. But Kliegman later increased the dioxin dosage to 7,500 micrograms. That's 468 times the dose that Dow Chemical's official had authorized. As a result, prisoners developed inflammatory pustules and papules. In the late 60s, the U.S. Army paid Kliegman to apply skin-blistering chemicals to inmates' faces and backs. Holmesburg proved that prisoners are invisible until they become convenient. Marion Sims' gynecological surgeries. Throughout the 1840s, J. Marion Sims performed surgical experiments on infants, enslaved African women, and girls as young as 13, all without anesthesia. He was treating conditions like vesicovaginal fistula, neonatal tetanus, and similar issues. Slave owners were willing to negotiate with Sims for access to these women because of their fertility's economic value if cured. The patients, one of whom was operated on 30 times, suffered from infections and many failed surgeries before being cured of vaginal fistula. The period between the mid and late 1840s, when Sims operated on enslaved women, was a time when the new practice of anesthesia wasn't universally accepted as safe and effective. But here's the thing. Sims didn't use anesthesia in the experiments he performed on enslaved women. He later used it on white female patients. The justification was that black women supposedly felt less pain, a racist belief used to rationalize medical brutality. Sims built modern gynecology on the bodies of women who couldn't say no. Operation Sea Spray. Around 1950, to simulate a biological warfare attack, the U.S. Navy sprayed large quantities of the bacterium Serratia marcescens, considered harmless at the time, over the city of San Francisco during a project called Operation Sea Spray. Numerous citizens contracted pneumonia-like illnesses, and at least one person died as a result. Edward Nevin, 75 years old, was hospitalized with a severe heart infection caused by sriracha. He died 3 weeks later. His family sued the government for gross negligence. A federal judge ruled in favor of the government in the early 80s. The court determined the government had immunity. Sriracha testing continued until at least the late 60s, 19 years after the confirmed death. The Navy argued they couldn't predict that a harmless bacterium would cause deaths. Cincinnati radiation experiments. From the early 60s to the early 70s, Dr. Eugene Sanger, funded by the Defense Atomic Support Agency, performed whole-body radiation experiments on more than 90 poor black patients with advanced-stage cancer and inoperable tumors at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. The patients weren't informed of the risks. Patients received 100 or more rads of whole-body radiation, which caused intense pain and vomiting in many cases. They were told they were receiving a treatment that might cure their cancer, but the Pentagon was actually trying to determine the effects of high radiation levels on the human body for military purposes. Sanger forged consent forms. He referred to patients only by their initials in medical reports, so that, in his words, there will be no means by which the patients can ever connect themselves up with the report, to prevent either adverse publicity or litigation. Sanger used people like they were disposable equipment and meticulously documented how to cover his tracks. Fernald State School. From the mid-40s to early 50s, at the Walter E. Fernald State School in Massachusetts, in an experiment sponsored by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission and the Quaker Oats Corporation, 73 children were fed oatmeal containing radioactive calcium and other radioisotopes to track how nutrients were digested. The children weren't told they were being fed radioactive chemicals. Hospital staff and researchers told them they were joining a science club. The researchers sought data on radiation absorption to gain a better understanding of how nuclear fallout would affect populations. In another study at Fernald in the mid-50s, researchers gave mentally disabled children radioactive calcium orally and intravenously. They also injected radioactive chemicals into malnourished babies, then collected cerebrospinal fluid for analysis from their brains and spines. The children were seen as ideal test subjects because they were institutionalized, and their parents had little power. Stanford Prison Experiment. In the early 70s, Stanford University psychologist Philip Zimbardo ran the Stanford Prison Experiment. 24 male students were randomly assigned roles as prisoners and guards in a mock prison set up in the basement of Stanford's psychology building. The participants adapted to their roles beyond Zimbardo's expectations. Guards exhibited authoritarian behavior and psychologically abused the prisoners, who passively accepted the abuse. The experiment was shut down after just 6 days, though it was supposed to last 2 weeks. Guards created humiliating punishments, deprived prisoners of sleep, and used isolation as torture. The experiment was widely controversial. Critics pointed to the lack of scientific principles and a control group, and ethical concerns about Zimbardo's failure to intervene in the prisoner abuse. Zimbardo acted as the prison superintendent and got lost in the role, not intervening when he should have stopped the experiment. Decades later, it was revealed that some guards were encouraged to be harsh. CIA torture research. During the 21st century war on terror, medical professionals gathered and collected data on the CIA's use of torture techniques on detainees to refine those techniques. According to a 2010 report by Physicians for Human Rights, research and medical experimentation on detainees was used to provide legal cover for torture, as well as to help justify and shape future procedures and policies. Medical research and experimentation on detainees was used to measure the effects of large-volume waterboarding and adjust the procedure based on results. Because of the waterboarding experiments, doctors recommended adding saline to the water to prevent putting detainees in a coma or killing them through overingestion of large amounts of plain water. Sleep deprivation tests were performed on over a dozen prisoners in 48-hour, 96-hour, and 180-hour increments. Doctors also collected data to help them judge the emotional and physical effects of the techniques, to calibrate the level of pain experienced by detainees during interrogation. Psychologists James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen ran a company that was paid $81 million by the CIA. According to the Senate Intelligence Committee report on CIA torture, they developed the enhanced interrogation techniques used. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See what's next. The Roman Empire. At its peak in 117 AD under Emperor Trajan, Rome controlled 5 million square kilometers, from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Mesopotamia.